Welcome to this interesting panel. I'm Julia Royce, and I'm the Public Policy Director for Central Europe at Facebook. And I'm very pleased to introduce today's program on misinformation, disinformation, and fact-checking. We all know that the media landscape has changed dramatically within the last decade, and also the way how we consume media and news. And we know that misinformation, disinformation, and hoaxing are accelerating, particularly in the World Wide Web. And we at Facebook are following this development, of course, very closely, and we find our ways to combat this. I recently had a very interesting conversation with some experts on another topic, and they explained me that there is a difference between challenges and a dilemma. And I think our problem about misinformation belongs to the second bucket. It's a dilemma. It's not a problem that you can tackle easily or find a black and white answer. It's something you have to, have a closer look and look at it in a more nuanced way. And this is where we have to ask our experts and researchers, because researchers do tackle problems in a more nuanced way. And I'm therefore very happy to introduce today's panel with our experts we have invited to discuss this problem today with you. So let me first introduce our Belgian guest, Michael Opgenhaffen. I hope I pronounced your way correctly. Michael is assistant professor in journalism and new media at the Institute for Media Studies at the University of Leuven. And he's currently director of the master program in journalism at the campus in Antwerp. His research interests are the relationship between journalism practice and digital technologies, social media news, and online fake news. Michael is also founder of the very interesting website, factcheck.Vlaanderen. We also have with us Eva Vermeulen. Eva is an associate professor in communication science, specializing in persuasion research. He obtained his PhD in 2003 at the Institute for Logic, Language and Information at the University of Amsterdam. Most of his current research focuses on the role of trust, biases, and persuasion processes. Our next external speaker is Tamara Witschke. Hello, Tamara. Tamara is lecturer, creative media for social change at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences and professor of media and creative industry at the University of Groningen. She obtained her PhD in the Amsterdam School of Communication Research and conducts research into the role of information in societies and the role of journalism within democracies. Our last participant is Jessica Sucker. Jessica is the head of health information policy at Facebook, including COVID-19 and vaccine and misinformation policies. She also leads Facebook's misinformation policy team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Jessica is part of the content policy team at Facebook, and it's her role to write the rules for what is and is not allowed on our platform. It is the goal of the content policy team to create a place where people can express themselves while also keeping people safe at the same time. To do this, they work with experts like you from around the world to make sure that we are drawing the lines in a way that maximizes voice as well as safety. So before I open up the discussion, I would like you to know that you can post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your webinar screen. And please also add the name of our speaker that you are directing your question to. That makes it easier for us. So maybe it's good to start with you, Jessica. We all realize that social media platforms play a very important role in combating misinformation and disinformation in our society today. Can you just quickly tell us how you do that at Facebook? How do you combat misinformation at Facebook?
Sure. Thanks, Julian. And thank you so much for everyone who's dialing in today and for those joining us on the panel. I think it's always really important to start any conversation on how Facebook combats misinformation with some definitions. I'm not sure how misinformation translates into Dutch, but in English, there's so many different concepts that refer to different aspects of this. You have fake news, misinformation, disinformation, coordinated and authentic behavior, information operations. You have so many different concepts that mean a lot of different things. And depending on which of these things we're talking about, there's different issues at stake. So to kind of set the ground rules here, at Facebook, we differentiate between false and misleading content. So what we refer to as misinformation, from the malicious behaviors or the fake actors who are sharing harmful content, which we consider to be disinformation. So I'm going to focus on the first part. So the actual false claims, the sky is purple, a piece of content that is untrue. And so how does Facebook tackle misinformation? We take a three-part approach. The first thing that we do is really to balance our values of promoting voice and freedom of expression, but also wanting to ensure our community is safe online. We remove misinformation when it can directly contribute to imminent physical harm. Now, in the context of a global health emergency like COVID, which I know is top of mind for many people today, we think about this concept in the context of, would somebody believing this misinformation increase the likelihood that they get or they spread COVID, or maybe they refuse to take a vaccine? So we don't allow things like COVID vaccines cause autism, or if you just drink bleach, you'll be cured from getting COVID. That's the kind of things that we don't allow on the platform. And because we're not health experts and don't think that a team of people like myself should be making these decisions by ourselves, we work with organizations like the World Health Organization, who help us understand when content is false and likely to lead to harm. And to give you some context in terms of the scale here, at least in the Netherlands, between January and March of this year, but before the Dutch general elections, we removed more than 17,000 pieces of content for violating this policy of being harmful misinformation about COVID-19. So that's the first part of our strategy. The second part of our strategy is for misinformation that doesn't lead to imminent physical harm. Our approach is to dramatically reduce the distribution that content gets across our platform. So we think, going back to these core values of safety and expression, that this is the most appropriate balance. So if it doesn't lead to imminent harm, what we will do is we will allow you to post it as a form of free expression, even if it's not true, but we're not going to show it at the top of people's platforms. We're going to reduce the distribution that it gets. The last part of our strategy is to empower users to make more informed decisions about what they see on our platforms. And this is really where our strategy of connecting people to authoritative information is really important, giving people more context about the content that they see on the platform through informational pop-up, redirecting them to authoritative debunkings is really key. And this is also really where media literacy plays an important role. And again, to give you some context, during the pandemic, we've done quite a number of different interventions to help connect people to health authorities, including those in the Netherlands. And so globally, since we've done this, we've connected 2 billion people around the world to authoritative information about COVID or vaccines. And then lastly, and then I'll stop so we can get into an actual discussion. Across our entire three-part approach of combating misinformation, absolutely integral is our work with external organizations, and specifically independent third-party fact checkers. So we work with 80 fact-checking organizations who cover 60 languages around the world today. All of our fact-checking partners have been certified by the International Fact-Checking Network. And here in the Netherlands, we work with AFP and DPA to review content in Dutch. So generally what happens is fact-checkers will choose to rate something that is on the Facebook and Instagram platforms. Once they rate something, Facebook will take a number of different enforcement actions. So we will reduce the distribution that false content gets on the platform. We will add warning labels. We'll send users notifications, and we'll increase penalties for people who repeatedly share this kind of content. And between January and March of this year, we added 1.5 million warning labels to content in the Netherlands, based on fact-checking organizations based on fact-checking articles from these organizations we work with. And just to give you one last data point, we know that these efforts are working because we learned that 95% of the time when people see these warning labels on Facebook, they actually don't click through to see the actual false content, which I think is really promising and helpful to just give us a sense of how our approach is working. So I'll stop there, and looking forward to hearing from you all questions and discussion.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for this very great insight. And many people say, and also you said that the only way to combat misinformation is in having a coordinated approach. I know, Mikael, that you're doing research on that. Can you just tell me a little bit more on what you mean about this coordinated approach?
Well, I think that we have to agree that Facebook already does a lot of efforts to fight disinformation and fake news, and that it's not the monster of Frankenstein, as a lot of people call Facebook, with regard to disinformation. I do believe that they put a lot of effort in the fight against disinformation. But indeed, a lot of additional efforts can be conducted, in my opinion, to fight disinformation. And as Jessica told earlier, a lot of approaches are conducted to fight disinformation. But what I miss a little bit is instead of the purely top-down approach, also the bottom-up approach. And the collaboration, for example, with probably the most important stakeholder of the platform, which are the users. And the community of the billions of users is very important, in my opinion, to fight disinformation. And sometimes I lack some kind of coordination between Facebook as a company, the platform, and the users on the other hand. And we know from past research that the dissemination and the spread of this information is conducted of course, by the users, in collaboration, of course, with the algorithms, but the users who click on the disinformation posts, who share the posts, who react on the posts, are the motor behind the dissemination of disinformation. And I strongly believe that some kind of bottom-up collaboration between Facebook and the users to fight disinformation can be very useful. So make it much more easy for users to flag disinformation, because now it's still behind some buttons, and there's no clear this is fake news or this is disinformation flag, in my opinion. But also stimulate the users to do something with disinformation, not to do something in terms of share it or comment it, because we know from research that gives a lot more visibility to the fake news, but try to stimulate the silent community, the middle group of users, to express their well, how do you say it, their need for information and need for correct information, and that can be counter strategy against the disseminations of disinformation.
Thank you, Mikael. So we also know that journalism in general has changed a lot and plays a huge role when it comes to spreading information. Tamara, can you tell us a little bit about your point of view, like in how far journalism or what journalism can do in the fight against misinformation?
Though you pose a very clear question, I could answer it. It feels like a detour almost, because what sprung to mind what I really loved when you started this conversation, you said it's a dilemma. And then when Jessica told us about all the many efforts that Facebook is doing, and I agree with Mikael that indeed there's a lot being done, it's almost as if we pretend it is a problem rather than a dilemma. So it's something that we can solve. And I think Jessica or you used the words combat misinformation. And I think we're missing the point then if we're making it. And I really appreciate Mikael's question or request to bring in the user, because I think what you started off with, Julia, was to say, okay, we need to get a more nuanced picture. So if we want to get a more nuanced picture, we need to break open what is it that we're talking about. And then it's not a simple delineation between misinformation. This is misinformation and this is disinformation. This is a hoax. And it's really about what's at the surface of it. Why do we share it? Why do we indeed, and why do we share it if even on the other hand, as Michael is posing, we have a need for quality information that is maybe not expressed. And what I really would hope, and what I was hoping for in this conversation, is that we are not just talking about this is how we're going to combat it, but actually, can we reframe what we're talking about? Can we really open up again? And indeed, Jessica didn't mention algorithms, didn't mention the whole, why is this even working? Because the fact that there's misinformation is always the case. Right now in my street, there is a whole campaign to post stickers on land. I don't know if you have, if you're, and it's really about the COVID situation, and it's really talking about, well, the media are the virus, or politicians, or so they're posting this in all public, but it doesn't spread much because it's like the sticker, I can't even pull it off. I really have to work, and it's the spread that is so powerful, or that makes it so impactful. That little nugget of information that you may not believe even, but you're sharing on. And I think we really need to go to, why are we sharing that? Why do we then spread it? Why does that become bigger? And I know that we have experts on around the table here who can talk about that. And I know Jessica probably can also talk about that. But I would really like to get just one layer behind. And then indeed, of course, I mean, when you're talking about journalists are a part of this whole constellation, and they are also struggling. What is our role? Do we even address, cover misinformation? Because sometimes if we cover it, then our coverage is used to say that we are part of the whole issue, and so they're also in this dilemma. So I'd really like for us to make space for the nuance and for the gray areas, and really for the things that we also as academics do not understand fully yet. We don't, it's not something that we're going to get a grip on or going to solve today. So I just wanted to share that because that came to mind.
Thanks, Tamara. Jessica, do you want to reply on that? I mean, what you have said, Tamara, is like the human need. I think we're talking, about a human need to exchange information and to be attracted by certain information. So I think a huge part is also like, what can an informed person do in order to, to be aware of, there are hoaxes, misinformation out there. So I would say like the informed user or educated user also helps in spreading those misinformation. Jessica, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these are such important points because you're right, especially with a community of over 2 billion users, it has to be empowered from the ground up. Users need to be able to decide for themselves what to read and what to trust, what to share. So I completely agree with you. I also want to kind of touch back on something Tamara was alluding to, which is the fact that misinformation is not a new phenomenon. It wasn't invented with technologies or social media. It predates technology, and it's been used sometimes by governments, by any kind of other people offline. But the way that it's being used on social media, of course, the scale is really just quite unprecedented, which is why Facebook invests so much in this space. But just a couple things on how we've evolved in the way that we've been thinking and how we've adapted our strategy to really get at this idea of empowering users. A few things that we've done. So one is that we've done quite a lot of user research and surveying to just better understand like how people interact and identify misinformation when they come across on the platform, and ways that we can do a better job of giving people more information. So one example is a few years ago when we had just started our fact-checking program, we used to have a different kind of way of labeling misinformation on the platform. So people would be able to post whatever it was, and then directly under the post, there would be a little box that would say, something, this has additional reporting on it. It wasn't totally clear what it was. And based on the user research that we did, people told us that they wanted more help in being able to more clearly spot misinformation. And so based on that, we updated our labeling. And so now when people post misinformation, that's been rated by a fact checker. What happens now is the post is entirely covered by a warning label, and the user has to click through to say that they actually want to see the content. And what I shared earlier, that's the statistic around 95% of the time people don't click through to see it. We basically, what we've learned is that just by adding a little bit of friction there of, the user has to pause before sharing, they have to click through to see a little bit more information, helps tremendously. And this is one of the ways that we've evolved. But to Mikhail's point, another thing that we've learned is that people can passively interact with misinformation, even if they're not sharing it, they're liking it or commenting on it. And we really wanted to do more to make sure that people knew that something that they were passively interacting with was misinformation. So one of the things that we've tried out during the course of COVID is a new way of notifying users that have interacted with harmful COVID misinformation. So if somebody that you know posted something like what I gave an example of before, like drinking bleach cures COVID, and you've not shared it, but you've liked it or you've commented on it, we started to send users notifications now to say, hey, something that you interacted with, we removed for violating this policy because the WHO says there's no cure for COVID. If you're interested in learning more about these kinds of issues, here's a direct link to the health authorities, for example. And then the last thing I'll say on this is just, I kind of touched on this earlier, but media literacy is absolutely integral to everything that we do, to Mikhail's point about really building a user base that is informed. And again, this year we've run kind of a few pilot programs trying to figure out what is the best way to help people be more informed. And so one of the ways that we've done this is we've partnered with our fact-checking organizations to do media literacy campaigns across the platform. So this has taken the form of sort of short informational promotions that we inject into the newsfeed that say like, when you see content on the platform, stop and think and share, check your sources, just kind of inserting everyday tips for people. But completely agree with everything that's been said so far. Just wanted to share a few things that we've done on our side to really help build a better informed user base.
Thanks, Jessica. Eva, what's your opinion on that? I'm very much interested on your point of view. Like you do research like on why we are so receptive for misinformation. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Just one small thing about discussion that took place just before. So a part of where we have to raise awareness about misinformation is also that you have to raise awareness about the role that people have. I think we can cherish the part where a lot of people have become like civic journalists, like journalists who are not part of a news organization, but like, I don't know, Bellingcat, try to get information themselves from wherever sources they are. But then people need to also be aware that they have a responsibility if they are acting as a journalist, more or less. And you are, I think, if you're creating news, but also if you are sending news to a particular audience. People have audiences now online, and they act the part of a journalist to some extent. And it's like a local community, it's your own community. It's like a local school paper where you have 300 followers or something, 300 people at school or something, you distribute news. If you do so, there are ethical guidelines. You have to figure out whether the news is true or not, and you cannot spread news that you know is untrue, or just news that is, for some reason, just promoting your agenda, and that's the only reason why you send it. So whether it's misinformation, whether you know it's true or not, if you just send it because it serves your agenda, then as a journalist, you're making mistakes. Actually, you're not behaving ethically. And so part of the program where we would have to educate people, and I guess that would start in school, is that if you do these types of things, that you're acting like a journalist. If you're spreading news, not personal things, but news, things that require expertise, then you should also adhere to some ethical rules that belong to this role. This is what I want to say, because that is a part that is often missed here. That are we civilians? Yeah, we're also acting as journalists, and that's an institutional role, more or less. I think different than just a civilian. You're acting like you have the news. You have access to the news. So I also really admire actually Facebook for what they try to do. To some extent, there is a problem. Tamara alluded to that. So the algorithm, I think actually at the moment, I see this on YouTube maybe more than on Facebook. The algorithm is so strict that it's really hard to get to misinformation. Actually, so it's not anymore the case that you get to misinformation really quickly. No, it's really hard to get to it. Even if you ask the particular questions that you think people might ask who are looking for it, you are immediately thrown back into mainstream media. And that might also backfire, I think, to some extent, because then people think, okay, they're all in on the same thing. I have to go to other platforms where I can find the information that I'm looking for. Final point, because you asked about the influence of misinformation. So the research I do clearly shows that even if people only see a headline, and it could be a headline about a politician, for example, not COVID related maybe, but a politician who has done something nasty, you only see the headline, then you see a warning that, sure, you see the warning at the same time, right? This information might not be true that you're seeing here. And it only says like, I don't know, politician arrested for sexual harassment or something, or accused of sexual harassment, might not be true. Even if people know it's not true, and you can ask them, do you still think it's true? No, it's not true. It turns out that the attitude towards this politician still suffers. So that is called continued influence, this part. So it's still the case that it influences people, even if they don't believe the news anymore, which is kind of horrible, I think. But this is how our mind works. We kind of forget whether the information was true, but we only remember the feeling that we had when we read the information.
Thank you, Iva.
Yeah.
Thank you, Iva. I mean, we as a company think it should not be our role to say, you know, what's true and what's false, and it's the reason why we have fact checkers on our platform. Do you think that the role of fact checkers, you know, how do you see in general the role of fact checkers, Michael or Mika? Maybe you can answer this question.
Well, there has been a strong debate on the role of fact-checking and fact-checkers in public opinion, and especially on social network sites like Facebook. Recent meta-analysis studies has indicated that fact-checking is a positive way to make the accuracy of the claim or the belief in some claims better. So, and there is no backfire effect. The backfire effect that Eva referred to is indeed existing, and is a severe problem. But in general terms, or in general wordings, there is no such thing as a backfire effect when people are confronted with fact checks and fact check rectification. So that's a good point, I think. But it's only one of the many strategies that can be conducted on social media to rectify disputable claims. I've done research myself on alternative ways of fact checking and promoting fact checks on social media, and one of the most important findings was that the radical believers or the radical disbelievers won't change their mind because of a fact check, which is not that surprising, but that there is, luckily for us, a large group of the so-called fence sitters using the platforms. And fence sitters are those who are in doubt. They don't have a radical belief pro or against some disputable claim, but they are in doubt. And I think it's very important that we target those fence sitters, because now they are only in doubt. But if we don't do anything about their doubt, they become radical believers or disbelievers in a specific claim. The research I conducted showed that the fact checks mainly changed the attitudes and the beliefs of those fence sitters. So they were helped by the rectifications in terms of a specific fact check. One of the things I want to add with regard to fact checks is that it is not enough to put a fact check article on some kind of website or in a newspaper, because then you only reach those who already are interested in the topic of the fact check. I think that we have to invest much more effort in so-called injecting of the fact checks there where disinformation is going around. So it's not enough to conduct a fact check and to put it on a website, but we as a community, as the users, but also the journalists, the individual journalists and so on, we have to inject the fact checks as the direct content interventions in Facebook pages, in groups, and on the timelines of our friends and family members who spread this information. I think it's very important because with regard to fact check, the risk of a backfire effect is very limited. And by injecting the fact checks in the timelines or at the posts that disseminates disinformation, you can reach those fence sitters who are, well, in doubt, but not yet radical believers or disbelievers.
Thanks, Michael. Aren't we all fence sitters? I really like this picture. Tamara, you wanted to add something here.
Yeah, I really appreciate Michael's contribution, and it aligns with Ivar's, where what makes this time so interesting and this dilemma so interesting, or what makes it perhaps a dilemma, is that it's riddled with paradoxes. And what I would really hope for us all is that we start to make space in our mind for these paradoxes, so that we can actually really start to come at this problem or dilemma from another direction. So some of the paradoxes that were mentioned today, so Ivar said, indeed, okay, so then you get the fact check and it's not true, but still it hurts the image of the person that the news was about. Or in Michael, what he's saying, okay, yeah, well, you can have a fact check, but if you're already disbelieving it, then you're still, you won't change your mind. And what I think we need is to make indeed enough space for the doubt. So we had my students did research with students, so it's not representative, but I think it's telling, which were quite higher educated students, and they all said of themselves, I know how to detect misinformation. But then when they continued the interview, then always doubt came up. So they strongly believe, I know what it takes, and I know what it takes to see when something is disinformation or misinformation. And then on the other end, on difficult topics, I doubt. And because we've got such a black and white, even here, right? It's a fact or it's not a fact. It's not that simple. And there are issues that we're dealing with as society that academics who spend their life researching it are not even sure. So how can we imagine that we as citizens are sure about something or can know what's the truth about something? So I think if we start there, and then, I mean, in the questions, there was a question, okay, is Facebook sharing any of the information also with media literacy expert or journalists? And what I'd really, my question maybe to Jessica and also to Julia is, what is it that you don't know yet? Because I appreciate it because you're doing so much, and that's all fun, right? It's all there's a strong foundation because you're the real experts. I mean, the amount of resources and the know-how and the that's, you know, we cannot, in academia, we do not have that type of resources. So you have all the data, you have all the insights, you know the mechanisms better than anyone. And I'm really curious, what is it that you don't know? What is it that you're struggling with? Where are the open questions for you? So I know you're tempted to answer, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this, but I'd love, because if we are going towards that coordinated approach that Mikael was talking about, I think also as institutions, as academic institutions, but also big institutions like Facebook, we have to acknowledge, you know what? We don't know everything. We don't know all the answers. We are not able to solve this. I know you want us to solve it, and I know it hurts to say, we're not able to solve it yet. And so, yeah, what are your open questions? What are the things that you're dealing with?
Such great points. I really appreciate the questions that you're raising, Tamara. One quick interjection, then I'll answer your question. I think this idea that the fact that there is not always objectively 100% true or 100% false concepts is so important here, that misinformation exists on a huge scale. Just to give you one crude example, the statement, ex-politician is a criminal. If that politician does not have an actual criminal background, is that statement misinformation? Is it an opinion? Is it satire? So it's just one example of just this is not a black and white space. There are some facts that are just objectively, false, like drinking bleach will cure coronavirus. But generally, misinformation is not that black and white. It is a huge spectrum. So I completely agree with you. But in terms of your part of the question, I think that there's a lot that we don't know. For me, I think my team content policy, as Julia mentioned, our job is to write the rules for what's allowed and not allowed on the platform. And we're always trying to balance freedom of expression and safety, which is inherently always going to be at tension with one another. So the kind of critical question that we are always asking ourselves whenever we're thinking about these lines is, what might the causal link between what online content is and what somebody's offline action might be as a result of seeing it? And that is something that people generally don't know. There's some issues where it is a little bit more clear. There is more research and we can draw a through line of like, somebody sees this thing on Facebook and then does this thing, but generally we don't always know that, particularly with misinformation. And so one of the ways that we try to get at that is just by having tons and tons of conversations with experts from around the world. So anytime we are making a change to our policy, whether it's we think we should be removing more vaccine misinformation, for example, we would be speaking with people from around the world who are experts in vaccinology, sociology, freedom of expression, all these things. And our what we try to do is just make our best assessment based on that huge amount of information from people. But the answer is people don't know what the causal link is, right? And so we need to do our job in listening to the input that we get and trying to make the best guesses based on what we're getting and based on the research that we do on our platform. But it's definitely one of the big open questions that we are always trying to solve every single day in our job.
Thanks, Jessica. I have the first question for Michael, or Mikhail, sorry, Mikhail. We have here a question that says, you said Facebook should stimulate the silent community to speak up in their need for correct information. But in general, there's a big silent majority in many communities on Facebook, but also in society in general. And stimulating them to use their voice is very difficult. Can Facebook do this, in your opinion?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. And indeed, I always refer to the silent community and to make the silent community less silent. But how to is a very important and I'm afraid difficult question. I know that a lot of people in my network disagree with a lot of posts they see on their timelines, not only on Facebook but also on Instagram and Twitter and other platforms. But they won't do anything with those posts because they are afraid to show their expression, to show their opinion, to show that they are disagreeing with some kind of their friends or family members. And I think that indeed the main purpose is to activate the community and to activate the individual users to let them express their voice and opinion. And in that regard, I again refer to the direct content intervention. So that the fact checks that are published online or are published on social media that can be used by individual users to refer to when they answer a post or they react on a post, and to say, well, what you're saying is interesting, but maybe you can take a fact check website or this fact check article because there's some severe doubt according to the accuracy of your claim. But most of the people I know and the community in general, is more keen to stay silent and to not express their disbelief in a specific claim. And maybe Facebook as a company can stimulate more the activation of individual members. To make it more easy to share fact check articles, to make it more easy to share the fact check flags, for example, because now only the labels or the flags appear on top of an article or is even invisible to the community, but only if you want to click on an article, you have to activate some button. But maybe it's an idea to make it more easy to share the fact check moderations in the timelines of people, to make them less silent. Indeed, very interesting question, but a difficult one, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Michael. So coming to our second question from the audience, it's for Jessica. The policy for political ads is not to fact check them. Will this policy be maintained, since so many politicians use Facebook, but not always feel the need to say the truth in order to be believed? Jessica, what do you say?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take that one. So just want to set some clarity here on what our policy is. So we don't send ads or organic posts from politicians to our third-party fact-checking organizations to be reviewed. Generally, we think that it's not the role of a private company to be limiting or censoring speech from politicians. We also don't think that would be the appropriate approach to holding them accountable, particularly in democratic societies. We think that that's the role of the press and for the voting population to hold their elected officials accountable for the words that they say. Now, that's not to say that politicians can get away with saying anything that they want on social media. That's absolutely not the case. So when it comes to these rules that I mentioned before, in terms of things that people are not allowed to post, whether that's hate speech or bullying and harassment, misinformation, content that could lead to direct harm to people, if you are a politician and you post that, we're going to take your content down. And if you post enough of these violating pieces of content, we will take even more aggressive measures by eventually disabling an account, which is what you've all probably seen we've done with President Trump's account. So to be super clear, politicians can't get away with anything that they want. We have removed politicians' content, heads of state, heads of government, ministers, when they violate these policies. If you post content that can lead to imminent physical harm, we'll treat you like anyone else. Something else that we do to just kind of provide more context when politicians share misinformation is, if something has been rated by a fact checker already, let's say there's been some viral story that has been widely fact checked by an organization, and a politician tries to share something like that, they get treated like everyone else. So if they try to share something that's been rated false already, their content gets the warning label, their content is going to be downranked. And so we do have quite a lot of measures in place to protect against any kind of harmful content from politicians, but we don't send the actual ads and their posts, because we want to allow people in the press and the voting population to be able to decide what they want to read and trust, and whether they want to continue to vote for their elected officials.
Thanks, Jessica. Great question. So we have another question from the audience. It's for Eva. Who do you think should take the lead in the attempt to decrease misinformation? Social media, companies, researchers, journalists, or governments? Eva, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so not governments. I mean, that would be the last, that's not what you want, right? And it is something that people say, like, shouldn't the government do something? Maybe stimulate educational programs, like media literacy programs, put some more money in it to gain expertise. That is what the government could do. I would say there's a larger role for the bigger news organizations. I think despite everything, they are still the most trusted news sources. And if you say to people how to distinguish fake news from real news, then, well, look at the source, right? And if it's a trusted news label, and whether it's right wing or left wing, but it adheres to journalistic ethics, right? This is what these organizations stand for. So it could be, I'm not sure whether this will work, but my idea would be that it would be so great if the bigger news organizations would get a major role in this. There were some fact-checking organizations were mentioned. People do not know them as a label, so that could also work, right? That you would make the fact-checking organizations, the labels of the fact-checking organizations, more well known, so that people would actually trust them. But people in the Netherlands, for example, would trust Telegraaf, Volkskrant, NOS. Most, like the silent majority, would. So I think that if we could integrate these major news labels, or nu.nl in the Netherlands, for example, people would trust that more or less as a news source. I'm not sure whether it would work, but it would work for the majority, I guess, of people. This is not to say that this would be a solution, but it would be like maybe part of it.
Thanks, Ivar. I'm very conscious of time, and I know that we're officially out of time, but I would suggest still we have another couple of questions. If you all are in for that, just to continue for a little while the conversation, if it's okay for you. Then I have another question here for Jessica. You mentioned a couple of new initiatives Facebook takes to reduce the spread of misinformation. Does Facebook also share these insights with, let's say, media literacy experts or journalists?
Yes, absolutely. So we post quite a lot of updates, both in terms of our own internal research and changes that we're making in our policies to the Facebook newsroom, which is the sort of company's hub for sharing out any changes. I'm happy to make sure that those on the call have resources and access to that, but definitely something that we do is we try to regularly share with experts, media literacy experts, and our partners whenever we're making changes like this.
Thanks, Jessica. I just see if there are any more questions so far. I can't see any more. So I think we all learned that, it is a dilemma. It's not there's no black and white answer for this difficult question about misinformation. And I, like Tamara said, it's, we have to acknowledge that there is no right or wrong way. It's we have to regard it, and I also admitted that ultimately there is no black and white. But I think it has also to do with our increasing complexity in society, that people have the need, and we all see it in ourselves. We love to have easy answers, like this is correct, this is not correct, this is true, this is false, this is black, this is white. But I think we have to acknowledge and to realize it's not that easy, and therefore we won't find the super answer for our discussion today. But it was very interesting discussing with you, and I highly appreciate the insights we've got from academia, from Mikael, from Tamara, from Eva, and also from Jessica. I just see here that you dropped just in this minute in another question. So do you think, so I will just add it here if you are fine with that. Do you think that one should be more empathetic for people to be more receptive to qualitative news, especially if the youth? So do you think that people should be more receptive or open towards quality news? Maybe it's a question for you, Tamara.
That's a hard one in 1 minute. Would be great, but how? I mean, it feels so prescriptive. And again, as you also said, it's like it's such a complex society. So, is it that we need young people to learn? Indeed, I mean, we've talked about media literacy, and for me, it's the question: what is media literacy? Is it just to send them towards quality information? Because again, then you come into question, okay, this is quality and this is non-quality. Or is it that we start to expand the ways in which we think about how we perceive the world, how we categorize it, how, and this is I think also some of the future-oriented thinking is, how do we learn to sit with complexity? How do we learn to sit with the discomfort of not knowing? So, this is raising a lot of hands, but I think that's more our question, because it does feel very uncomfortable, and it's much more, it's a much quicker result, even physically. It's like if something hits you, like, and now I'm going to run with this, and I'm going to share it with all my friends, even I don't believe it, but I want to share this because somehow it touched me. Or do you sit with, I don't know, and I don't know actually what the answer is, and it it asks me, it demands a certain type of trust, and who do I trust then, and who do I surrender myself to? So those are really tricky questions in a society where polarization is fed by exactly the things that we're talking about today. So not a quick answer, but Michael and Eva are gonna give the answer.
Thanks, Samara. Eva, you wanted to add something?
I think Michael was first.
Sorry, excuse me, Michael, please.
It's very kind of you, Eva. No, one thing I wanted to add is, in my opinion, the problem of the distinction between professional news accounts on Facebook and non-professional or rubbish news accounts on Facebook timeline. Sorry, that was a door that closed. News consumption behavior has changed over the past a few years, especially in terms of Facebook news consumption. And when my daughters are on Facebook and they scroll on their timeline, they see some professional news accounts, but they also see some non-professional news accounts or even fake news accounts. And in my opinion, the distinction between professional news accounts and non-professional news accounts should be stressed more by the platform itself in terms of the look and feel, for example. Because if they are scrolling and they decide in terms of or microseconds which article they should click on, they don't look at the brand of the news corporation, or they don't look at the author or the journalist who wrote the article. They just look at the headline or the picture in the news posts. So in my opinion, and I know that Facebook has done some kind of efforts to distinguish legacy and professional news media from non-professional, but I think that much more steps could be made to make professional news posts much more visible than non-professional or even disinformation news posts. To make it especially young news consumers, much more easy to know, well, if I click on this post, I get to read a professional news post and not a non-professional or a rubbish news post.
Thanks, Michael. Eva, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll be short. So this relates to the same point. And I appreciate also that people will not see the difference between professional and non-professional news and in the spur of the moment and because of their interest. However, we should be aware, and I think there's a lack of awareness now that to be a journalist is a profession. You wouldn't go to a doctor that just says things, right? And claims he's a doctor or she's a doctor and then just does some things that she or he thinks might be the case. And the same holds for a psychologist, for example. Just to claim that you have information here doesn't mean you have it, right? People are educated to be a journalist and they're working in an organization that is professional. And therefore we should actually turn to these organizations for news and not to our other organizations because they are the professionals here. And I think there is a more or less black and white distinction here. Not that everything the mainstream news media says is true and what the other people say is false. That's not the case at all. But it's on who you could maybe trust on default and who you might mistrust on default. And we could do a little bit better, I think, in educating people to that extent that we should not distrust mainstream media because they do adhere to ethical guidelines because they're professionals. And we should acknowledge journalists, professionals for what they are. For the rest, I agree that it's really hard to distinguish the two, but this would be one way.
Thanks. It's a very powerful last phrase. Thank you very much for your insights and for sharing your research with us. I really hope that we continue our collaboration with you to combat misinformation on our platforms and generally in the World Wide Web out there. I think this is very important. And also, as you said, and we agreed on, to acknowledge that there is no easy answer to this difficult dilemma. So thanks again for being with us today, and I wish you all a wonderful day. And also thanks to the audience for staying with us and asking these questions. Have a great day. Thank you.
And thank you,
Bye-bye.
Julia, for hosting.
Thank you for hosting. Bye-bye.
Nice to talk to you all.